Hello and welcome back. I'm so glad you're here, and I hope you're ready to unwind with another eerie tale. If you're enjoying these stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. And hey, feel free to comment below. Let me know where you're listening from. It's always interesting to hear about the places that join in on these little moments of suspense. Tonight, I have a story that begins quite simply, but trust me, the calmness won't last. It's a story about a pizza order. But this isn't your usual delivery. Let me take you back to a quiet evening, not unlike one you might be experiencing now. The kind of night where the air feels just right, and the day's stress begins to slip away. The main character of our story, Sarah, had just finished her usual evening routine. A warm bath, a cup of tea, and a cozy blanket draped over her as she settled in for the night. Sarah lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place where everything felt safe and familiar. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, and the occasional bark of a dog outside were the only sounds that filled her space. It was peaceful. It was the kind of place where nothing felt out of the ordinary. And for Sarah, that routine was everything. She'd gotten home from work around 6 p.m., tired from the long day, but instead of making dinner, she decided to order in a pizza. It wasn't a special occasion, just a random craving that was all too common. The idea of a warm, cheesy pizza delivered right to her door felt comforting, like a small indulgence that she'd earned after a long week. As she picked up her phone to place the order, everything felt normal. Too normal, perhaps. She scrolled through the app, picking her favorite, a simple margarita pizza with extra cheese. A glance at the clock confirmed it was the perfect time for a delivery. She pressed order, and as the confirmation popped up on her screen, Sarah sank into her couch, sighing with relief. The minutes passed by, and soon she was distracted by a low, steady sound. It wasn't unusual, but something about it was different. At first, she thought it was the wind rattling the window, but no. It was coming from inside the apartment. A soft, rhythmic tapping noise, as if someone was gently knocking on the wall. Sarah froze. She had lived here for over a year, and the building's walls were old. Sometimes the pipes would creak, or the wind would make odd noises. But this was different. It was too deliberate. Almost like someone was tapping on her wall in a pattern. She glanced over her shoulder towards the wall, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the faint shadow of a lamp casting long streaks across the room. The tapping stopped as soon as it had started, and Sarah shook her head, telling herself it was probably just the pipes settling or the building shifting. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that there was something more to this noise than mere imagination. Still, she tried to ignore it. The doorbell would ring soon, and that would be the distraction she needed. But just as she started to forget about it, the sound returned. This time it was louder, more pronounced, closer. The unmistakable noise of someone knocking on her door. She stood up, her heart fluttering in her chest. That was strange. The delivery was supposed to be here any minute, but no one had come to the door yet. And yet, the sound persisted. A chill ran down her spine. She hesitated, but then, with a quick glance towards the peephole, she made her way to the door. No one. The hallway outside her door was empty. Confused, she opened the door, peering out into the dimly lit corridor. She half expected someone to be standing there, but the space was eerily vacant. The air felt colder than before, a subtle but noticeable shift that made Sarah's skin prickle. She stepped back into her apartment, locking the door firmly behind her. Had she imagined the knocking? It didn't seem like it. The feeling of unease lingered, an invisible weight pressing down on her shoulders. Just as Sarah was about to shake off the experience, her phone buzzed. The pizza delivery was here. But the buzzing felt off. The notification didn't show the usual name of the delivery service. It simply said, "Your pizza is on the way. Please accept the delivery." Sarah frowned. There was something about that message, something that made her feel uneasy. Normally, there would be a simple name and confirmation, but this was different. She went to the window, pulling aside the curtain to peek outside. The streetlights shone brightly, casting a yellow glow across the parking lot. A single car was parked near the entrance. No delivery driver in sight. Suddenly, the tapping sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from behind her, from inside the apartment. Sarah's heart raced. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Her eyes scanned the room, but again, there was nothing there. The phone buzzed again. "Please accept the delivery," the message read, with no other information. A sense of dread washed over Sarah as she stared at the screen. Something wasn't right. The knocking continued, each tap ringing through her apartment like a countdown to something she didn't want to face. She swallowed hard, her hand trembling as she picked up the phone and reluctantly clicked accept. As Sarah pressed accept, she felt the air around her grow heavier. The low thumping noise on the walls continued, this time more insistent, almost as if it was calling her attention to something she wasn't ready to confront. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she slowly set the phone down on the table, staring at it for a moment before she took a deep breath. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was the anxiety from a long day. She tried to tell herself that it was nothing, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. Her mind raced. What could have been strange about a pizza delivery? There was nothing inherently scary about it, right? But something was wrong. The fact that the delivery confirmation came with no name, no usual contact information, felt wrong. And now there was the knocking, the unsettling rhythmic tapping. She glanced again at the door, the dark hallway outside still untouched. The apartment was silent now, save for the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing by outside. But the eerie tension in the room remained. Sarah walked to the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. She wanted to check the peephole again, but something made her stop. She was afraid of what she might see. Instead, she called out, "Hello?" No response. She hesitated, her mind torn between wanting to open the door and the overwhelming urge to just lock it and forget this ever happened. But there was a small part of her, the part that couldn't shake the sense of unease, telling her to answer the door. She walked over and slowly turned the knob. The door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit hallway. There, standing just beyond the threshold, was a delivery box. Though its red ladder had touched the ground, a pizza box, its lid closed tight. No delivery driver in sight. Servants staggered around the corner. Sarah felt her breath hitch in her throat. The box was sitting there, on the floor, as though it had always been there, waiting for her. Her first instinct was to slam the door shut. But something held her back. Her curiosity, her need to know, was stronger than the fear clawing at her insides. She knelt down and picked up the box, noticing how cold it felt in her hands. The familiar weight of a pizza box, yet somehow wrong. She stared at the lid, her fingers trembling. The box was plain. No logos, no markings. Just a simple white box, as if it were custom-made just for this moment. A chill ran down her spine as she reached for the lid, opening it slowly. Inside was a pizza, but it wasn't the margarita she had ordered. Instead, it was something far stranger. The cheese was stretched unnaturally, forming twisted, intricate shapes across the surface. The crust was darker than usual, almost burnt at the edges, with streaks of red running through it. The tomato sauce, if it was eerie glossy sheen, that made Sarah's stomach churn. The smell was faintly familiar, but with something sharp beneath it, like iron and smoke. For a moment she just stared at it, her breath shallow. There was no way this was her order. But who could have sent it? The knocking started again, louder this time, but it wasn't coming from the walls anymore. It was coming from inside the apartment. Sarah whipped her head around, eyes wide, but the room was still empty. Her heart raced as she slammed the pizza box shut, almost dropping it in the process. She had to get rid of it, had to get away from whatever this was. With trembling hands, she hurried to the kitchen and set the box on the counter, her eyes never leaving it for a second. She needed to calm down. This was probably some strange prank or a mistake. Nothing more. But then she heard something else. A soft whisper, just at the edge of hearing, coming from the box. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then it came again, louder this time. "Help me." Her blood ran cold. Sarah stood frozen in place, staring at the box. The words were unmistakable, but they weren't in any language she could understand. They were the sound of something desperate, something trapped. The air around her grew colder, her breath visible in the now chilled apartment. She instinctively backed away from the counter, her eyes locked on the box. Her mind screamed at her to leave, to walk away from whatever this was. But her feet wouldn't move. She could barely breathe, each inhale feeling like it would be her last. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the whispering stopped. The air settled, and the apartment felt still. Silent. But Sarah's heart wasn't calm. It pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. She didn't know what was happening, but she had the horrible feeling that whatever was in that box had been waiting for her. Her phone buzzed again. "Please accept the delivery." The message was the same as before, but this time it felt like a command, not just a notification. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. The phone vibrated again, its screen lighting up in the dim kitchen. Sarah stared at it, her fingers trembling, the message unchanged. "Please accept the delivery." Her mind raced. This was no coincidence. This wasn't a prank. The strange pizza, the knocking, the whispering, it was all connected. But to what? And why her? She stepped away from the kitchen counter, her eyes still fixed on the pizza box. It sat there, innocently on the counter, as if nothing had happened. But Sarah knew better now. That box wasn't just food. It was something much more sinister. The apartment felt colder, the chill now creeping into her bones. Her breath came out in clouds, visible in the still air. She moved to the window, pulling the curtain aside to peer outside, but the night was thick with darkness. The street lights cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood, but no one was out there. No one had seen anything. The world outside seemed oblivious to the terror unfolding inside her own walls. She forced herself to look away, her hands gripping the windowsill. It wasn't safe here anymore. This apartment, her sanctuary, had been invaded by something she couldn't explain. A sudden loud thud made her jump, her heart racing. The sound had come from the hallway again. It was as if the walls themselves were alive, pounding with an unseen force. She wanted to run, to lock herself away, but a strange compulsion kept her rooted in place. Scarcely 8 to 10, though. She didn't know why, but she couldn't leave the pizza. It felt like she had no choice but to stay. The whispering had made that clear. It was as if something, someone, was depending on her to do something. And that something was tied to the pizza. Her mind screamed in protest, but her body moved forward, almost of its own accord. She returned to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she reached for the box. The moment her fingers brushed the cold cardboard, the air around her seemed to freeze. She opened the lid again, feeling her pulse quicken. Inside, the pizza had changed. The strange shapes in the cheese were now more pronounced, twisting in unnatural patterns. The red streaks on the crust had deepened, like veins running through the dough, and the scent was stronger now. Sickly sweet and metallic, as though something had been cooked into it. Then the whisper came again, louder this time, filling the entire room with its voice. "Help me, please." Sarah's eyes widened as she stared down at the pizza. This was no ordinary delivery. Whatever had been inside the box, whatever force had sent it to her, was getting more insistent. The whispering wasn't just a sound. It felt like a presence in the room, pushing at her, surrounding her. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to look away, but she couldn't. Her gaze was locked onto the pizza, her body frozen in place, as if the box was exerting some kind of power over her. A faint noise came from the corner of the room, something shifting, scraping against the walls. She glanced over her shoulder, but there was nothing there. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started, and yet Sarah knew something was watching her. The presence was growing stronger, something watching from just outside her vision. But when she tried to focus, it disappeared. She stepped back, her mind in chaos. What was happening? Who was in control here? Was it the pizza? Was it the house? Or something far worse? The phone buzzed again, a new message blinking on the screen. "You must accept the delivery. It is your fate." Fate. Her heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? Was she being manipulated by an unseen hand? Or was she losing her mind? Terror curled in her stomach as she reached for the phone. The delivery confirmation was still there, that same cold, unfeeling request. Accept the delivery. A sudden realization hit her like a wave. She had to get rid of it. She had to destroy the pizza. But how? How could something like this be destroyed? It wasn't just food. It was something more. Something dark. The knocking returned, louder this time. It wasn't just at the door anymore. It was in the walls, the floors, the ceiling. The apartment seemed to be shaking under the force of the unseen thuds. Everything was moving. The room felt alive, suffocating her. "Help me." The whisper was louder now, desperate. Her skin prickled as the voice seemed to come from everywhere, from the very air around her. She backed away, her pulse racing, her mind screaming for escape, but the door was still locked. The window wouldn't open. The apartment was closing in around her. And then, as if on cue, the phone vibrated again, the screen lighting up with the same cold message. "Please accept the delivery." This time there was no hesitation. There was no choice. She picked up the phone, fingers trembling, and tapped the button. The moment Sarah tapped the button to accept the delivery, the air around her seemed to shift. The walls seemed to hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration filling the room. It was as if something in the very structure of the apartment had come alive. She looked down at the pizza, her heart pounding in her chest, waiting for some kind of response, some shift in reality to reveal what would come next. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Silence. And then the temperature dropped sharply. She could see her breath misting in front of her face as the chill gripped her body. The soft hum of the apartment had turned into a cold, oppressive quiet, leaving her with the sickening feeling of being utterly alone in this space, yet far from it. The whispers were gone now, replaced by the eerie sound of the pizza box shifting on its own, the lid gently rising and falling as though something inside it was breathing. Her fingers trembled as she reached toward the box again, compelled by a force she didn't understand. The moment her hand brushed the cardboard, the box jerked violently. She recoiled in shock, stumbling back, but the force was immediate. Something had locked its hold on her, pulling her back to the counter. The whisper returned, louder and more insistent than before. "It's your turn now." Her body refused to obey her mind. She felt herself lean closer to the box, her hands trembling as she opened it once more. The pizza inside was no longer just food. It had transformed, shifting like a living organism. The cheese was no longer a solid mass. It was writhing, pulsating, as though something beneath it was trying to break free. The toppings were no longer recognizable, dismembered pieces that resembled something far worse than meat, and terror clawed at her, but there was a strange, sick fascination too. Her eyes couldn't leave the grotesque scene before her, even though every instinct screamed at her to run. She stepped back, breath shallow, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The box seemed to breathe in and out, as though it had a life of its own. The room was now filled with an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something was about to happen. Something irreversible. And then she saw it. A movement, something, someone inside the pizza, rising from the depths of the shifting cheese and dough. The figure wasn't human, at least not anymore. It was a twisted amalgamation of shapes, an unsettling figure wrapped in dark, oozing tendrils that reached out from the pizza like an obscene extension of the darkness itself. It had no face, but it knew she was there. It was aware of her. Her breath caught in her throat, her legs frozen in place. The room seemed to stretch and warp, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing. The lights flickered, and the walls groaned under the pressure of whatever force had been unleashed. "Please, help me." The whisper came again, but this time it was distorted, garbled, as though the words were coming from deep within the pizza itself. Her mind raced, thoughts tumbling over each other. She had accepted it. She had made the choice. Now there was no turning back. One more terrific ride in this damned train car. But why? Why had she done it? What had she hoped would happen? Could she escape now? Or was she too deep in it? The temperature dropped again, colder this time, seeping into her bones. The presence in the room had grown. It was no longer just in the pizza. It was everywhere, lurking in the corners, filling the air, pressing against her skin. She could feel it, its cold breath on her neck, its weight on her chest. The figure in the pizza stirred again. It was almost free now, its tendrils crawling out, wrapping around the pizza box and extending outward toward her. Sarah stumbled backward, gasping for air, but the figure was faster than she was. It shot forward, tendrils grabbing at her arms, its cold, clammy grip wrapping around her wrists, pulling her closer. She screamed, but the sound was choked off as a sudden pressure squeezed her chest. Her vision blurred, and the walls seemed to close in around her. The room was no longer her apartment. It was a nightmare, a distorted, twisting version of reality where the rules no longer applied. Her mind screamed for help, but the room was empty. She was alone, trapped in the grip of whatever this thing was. The pizza was the conduit, the portal, and she had opened it. The whisper, now loud and full of dark satisfaction, echoed in her mind. You should have never opened it. And then, everything stopped. The room went silent. The coldness disappeared. The figure was gone. The pizza was just pizza again. Normal, harmless. No grotesque tendrils, no shifting forms. Just food. Her chest heaved as she gasped for breath, her heart racing. What had just happened? Was it all in her mind? Was it a hallucination, a trick her fear had played on her? But no. Something had changed. Something had been released. The room might be quiet now, but the oppressive weight in the air told her that whatever this was, it wasn't finished. And the pizza? It still sat there as if nothing had happened. But she knew better now. She couldn't trust it. Not anymore. The phone buzzed again. You must finish the meal. Sarah stared at her phone, her vision blurring as the words glowed ominously on the screen. "You must finish the meal." Her body trembled, but her mind refused to comprehend. Finish the meal after everything she'd just witnessed? Her stomach churned at the thought of taking even one bite of the grotesque living nightmare that masqueraded as food. She tried to calm herself, backing away from the counter. Maybe she could ignore it. Maybe this was all a bad dream, something her mind had conjured up in her exhaustion. She glanced at the clock. It hadn't moved. The hands were frozen, stuck at 11:37 p.m. No, this was real. The pizza box was still there, sitting on the counter like an ominous invitation. Her phone buzzed again, startling her. This time, the screen displayed something new, a video feed. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. It was her apartment, her kitchen, her counter, the pizza box. From above, like the view of a hidden camera. The perspective shifted slightly, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized it wasn't a camera. It was something else, something unseen, watching her from the shadows. "Finish the meal, or it will finish you." The words appeared on the screen in bold, blood-red letters, and then the feed cut out. Her phone went black, reflecting her pale, terrified face. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the carpet. The walls felt as though they were closing in on her again, the oppressive weight of the unseen presence pressing harder than ever. Her stomach growled, a deep, unnatural sound that echoed through the room. Hunger. Not hers. Something else. She clutched her stomach, panic rising in her chest. The hunger wasn't hers. It was being forced upon her, clawing at her insides, demanding to be fed. Her eyes drifted to the pizza box against her will. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, I won't. You can't make me." The room responded. The lights flickered, plunging her into darkness for a moment before they flared back to life. The walls creaked, groaning under the weight of something immense and unseen. The pizza box slid across the counter, stopping inches from the edge. Her phone buzzed once more. "Take a bite, or we'll take a piece of you." Her heart raced. She wanted to run, to flee the apartment, but her legs wouldn't obey. She felt rooted to the spot, as if invisible chains bound her to this horrifying scene. The box opened slowly, as if by some unseen hand. The pizza inside was no longer writhing, no longer grotesque. It looked normal now, cheesy, greasy, and golden brown. But Sarah knew better. She could still feel it, the darkness, the malevolence. Her stomach growled again, the sound louder this time, almost deafening. She clutched her sides, falling to her knees. The hunger was unbearable now, tearing through her body like fire. She cried out in pain, her voice echoing in the empty apartment. "Fine," she screamed, her voice breaking. "I'll do it. Just stop." The room fell silent. The air grew still. Her hands trembled as she reached for the slice, her fingers brushing the greasy crust. She lifted it slowly, the weight of the slice far heavier than it should have been. It felt alive in her hands, pulsing faintly with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. The first bite was agony. The moment her teeth sank into the pizza, the room exploded with sound. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of despair. She gagged, the taste sour and metallic, as though she were biting into something far worse than food. Her vision blurred, dark tendrils creeping into the edges of her sight. The room twisted and warped around her, the walls bending like liquid. She dropped the slice, but it was too late. The damage was done. A new voice entered her mind, low and guttural, a voice that felt ancient and cruel. "Good. Now, you belong to us." The shadows in the room coalesced, taking shape, rising from the corners and pooling together in the center of the kitchen. A figure emerged, towering and formless, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. It pointed at her, its voice like 1,000 screams layered together. "A bite is never enough." Sarah collapsed, her body convulsing as the hunger took over completely. Her vision faded to black. The last thing she heard was her own voice screaming alongside the whispers. She said. When she woke, the room was quiet. The pizza box was gone. So was her reflection. Sarah woke to silence, her body sprawled on the cold kitchen floor. The room was eerily still, the oppressive atmosphere replaced by an uncanny calm. She pushed herself upright, her head pounding, her mouth dry. The pizza box was gone. Her phone sat on the counter, the screen blank. She reached for it cautiously, her fingers brushing the cool surface. The device powered on with a soft glow, but there were no messages, no videos, nothing to suggest the horrifying events of the night. Had it all been a dream? She staggered to the sink, splashing cold water on her face. The sensation was grounding, real. She glanced up at the mirror above the sink and froze. Her reflection wasn't there. Panic surged through her as she leaned closer, touching her face, her hair, her arms. She was still there. She could feel herself, but the mirror reflected only the empty room behind her. Her chest tightened as she turned away, refusing to look at the void any longer. The hunger hit her like a wave. It was deep, primal, and insatiable, clawing at her insides with an intensity that made her double over. She clutched her stomach, groaning in pain. The hunger was unlike anything she'd ever felt before, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of food could fill. Desperate, she opened the fridge, grabbing anything she could find, a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, leftover takeout. She devoured it all, barely tasting it, but the hunger only grew stronger. Her phone buzzed. She hesitated, dread pooling in her stomach. Slowly she picked it up. The meal is not over. Her hands shook as she dropped the phone. It clattered onto the counter, the screen cracking, but the words remained, glowing through the fractured glass. The shadows began to stir. They crept along the walls, pooling in the corners, slithering toward her like living things. The air grew cold, and the oppressive weight returned, heavier than before. A low growl echoed through the apartment, the sound resonating deep in her chest. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else entirely. Something ancient. Something hungry. The hunger inside her reached a fever pitch, consuming her thoughts, her senses, her very being. She clawed at her own skin, desperate to rid herself of the unbearable sensation. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, the screen displayed a single haunting sentence. "You are the meal." The shadows lunged. They engulfed her, pulling her into a void of darkness and whispers. She screamed, her voice lost in the cacophony. The hunger inside her merged with the darkness, becoming one, an endless cycle of consumption and despair. When the shadows receded, the apartment was empty. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the hands moving once more. The fridge was stocked, the kitchen immaculate, as though nothing had happened. Operating accommodator, correct. Grip's forearm was felt and jerked back. "You took the clock and the water on the handle?" asked Rachel. "Yes." But Sarah was gone. Epilogue. The next tenant moved in a month later, a young man named Eric. He found the place cozy and quiet, perfect for his needs. The first night went by uneventfully, but on the second, he decided to order pizza from a local place called Midnight Cravings. When the delivery arrived, the box felt heavier than it should have. As he opened it, the faint sound of whispers filled the air,